Well, today's a wonderful day to be here, and one of my favorite books is called A Father's Love. We are fortunate that the United Way has been able to secure a grant from the Ponca City Literacy Council, which I was a president, and the board met, and we decided to move our funds to United Way for a literacy initiative, and so we chose Dolly Barton's Reading Library as that vehicle, and so children from birth to age 6, every month they get a new book. And so, they've got a significant number by the time they have their, they have their own library. And so the one on this father is by Hannah Holt. And I love this book, and this is one of the books that they got this time, it was about Papa's love. And Papa, and I'm just going to read a couple of pages. Papas come in many stripes, the big, the bold, the silent types. Beneath the ground or high above, each father's heart comes filled with love. And I'll end the page of it with that, it's just a father's love is always there. A father's love is everywhere. And it has the pictures are just so beautiful of just the earth and just thinking about our Father in heaven, being there with us, and wherever we are. So if you don't have this book, I'm sure Jerry can find it for us at Brace Book. But today is such a special, special day for Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all of you, and I hope that you have a father image in your life. And if you don't, this church is filled with father images and father peoples that will step up and be a father to anybody. That's the gift of being a part of this church. So our text, when we get ready to lead into that, just before our text today, Jesus has told the parable of the mustard seed as well as the sower who flings his seeds and finds some have fallen on ground and fertile soil, and some have landed on rocks, and yet others have landed on hard soil. Jesus conveys in these parables the huge possibilities of the kingdom of God. And for a while, it will only come in a whisper or a small beginning. Furthermore, the kingdom is in fact presented as vulnerable and can be easily lost or taken away by birds, smothered by weeds, or dried out and shrunken by the sun. We have our text then where Jesus is asleep while a storm is forming. It's hitting, and while the disciples are shaking in their boots with terror and fear of death, Jesus is calmly resting. Then, just following our text, Jesus performs miracles and reveals his lordship. Jesus, a man who has appeared out of nowhere, is from Nazareth, a carpenter's son, suddenly has the power to tame creation, get rid of demons, defeat death, cure disease, and feeds the hungry. Our reading, Mark 4:35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Words of faith for the people of faith. Thanks be to God. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, Holy One. So I have to let you know, I do not know how to swim. I've tried a number of times to take lessons. When it comes to giving up my floating board, I just can't do it. My husband and Jessica's dad, Robert, were going fishing, and we did that often, but we always fished from the bank or the edge. Even our family pond, I didn't go out in it either. And then we had also, on our trips, this wonderful bird dog who came to us. It was about 3 days after my dad passed away, so I've always had a dog in my life because they are just so special to me. But he always would tag along with us. He would basically be our shadow, except for when it came to fishing. During fishing, he would not take his eye off the bobber or the fishing line. He'd just sit there until he'd just shake because he was just so excited to see something happen. And when he would see that bobber dip a little bit, or he would see that line look like something was kind of nipping at it, he was all just right there even more. He would just literally quiver with excitement. So Robert thought, this was just we were having a great time. And so he decided, let's rent a canoe, and we'll just get out there and we'll take the dog with us, and I bet it'll just be great. So we get in a canoe. I have my life jacket on. I also have one that you can sit on, the one that they tell you on the plane that you can put your arms in and grab it if you need. So I had two devices to help me. Okay, so we get out there, and, we're enjoying it. The weather's nice. There's just a little bit of a breeze, and it's just wonderful. And I just think, wow. And then we're just about, at some point, Robert says something like, well, they've told me this lake's about 35 foot out in the middle. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, we're in the middle. We're in the middle here. So I kind of reassure myself with my life jacket and my floating device. I check to make sure it's under. And at the same time, I've got this fishing pole in my hand, trying to fish. And so I take a deep breath, and I self-talk myself and say, you're going to be fine. You've got everything you need right here, right? And then Bo, our dog, he sees something floating by. And he's like, oh, what is that? I've not been out like this, And so he gradually just gets himself a little further. His paws are on the edge of the, and it's a canoe. So if you move around very much, it starts kind of tipping a little bit. And so every time he stretches his neck a little farther, the tipping of the boat happens a little bit more. And at some point, I'm thinking, 35 foot, I let go of my fishing pole, and Robert is like, grabbing for the pole, grabbing for the dog, because he's about ready to leap in, and our canoe is doing this. He's looking at me like I've lost my mind, and then he looks a little bit further, and he sees that I am terrified, absolutely terrified. I don't know how he did it, how he grabbed the dog, grabbed my pole that I had protruded off, but somehow we got back to the bank. And I tell you what, when I hit ground, I was just like, oh, thank God there is solid ground underneath me. I never got in a small little canoe or a boat after that. It's always had to be bigger. But, I just think I got myself get terrified, absolutely petrified that this is happening. And it was a calm lake. I cannot even imagine what it must have felt like to be whooped around like you were sharing, Jennifer, with this in the Sea of Galilee. And that it was just such a dangerous time, that there was stuff going on. But what's interesting about where this lake and the sea were is that it's surrounded by mountains. And so on several sides of the mountain, when that air hits that cooler water of the lake and sea, it picks up great energy. And so it's pretty common that there might be 30 or 40 foot waves that are happening or generated in this area. And even though the disciples were used to being around water, they were fishermen, they did not feel safe. So it had to be a horrific storm that had come up. And as each moment passed while they're sitting there and trying to figure out how safety is going to be, that storm is building momentum. And what do? They cry out, "Wake up, teacher. Do you not realize that we are perishing? We need you." Isn't that where we find ourselves sometimes? In the middle of a storm, up to our eyeballs, in over our head, in challenges. We exhaust every ounce of what we can muster up, or we think of, and then we end up, what do? We deplete our resources and we deplete our energy. Well, it seems, though, that when we're in those moments, it's like we are being tossed about in a storm. And all we want to do is to get on solid ground again. For some reason, I find myself thinking that surely I can hold on long enough to ride it out in any storm. I have the capability. I've been to school. I know how to get through things, right? But that's where I still sometimes catch myself is, I can get through this. Oh, Lily, do others do that? Do they think they have to save themselves to ride the storm alone? Augustine, whose salvation story and prolific writing is still considered to be some of the church's most important writings after the Bible. And he helps us, I think, relate to challenges in the storms of our life. He points out when we have to listen to abuse, that means we are being shattered and battered by the wind. When our anger is aroused, we are being tossed by the waves. When the wind blows and the waves mount high, the boat is in danger. Our heart is put in danger. Our heart is taking a battering. When we are insulted, we long to retaliate, but the joy of revenge brings with it another kind of misfortune, shipwreck. Why is this? Because Jesus is asleep in us. We have forgotten Christ's presence, so we must rouse him, then remember him, then let him keep watch within us and be our anchor. Reynold Price tells of an 87-year-old woman who was able to see scattered clouds and darkness lift. She was facing her own time of difficulty as well because she was going through exhausting tests, medical tests in preparation for a surgery. You know how that feels. But one day, she had this vision of sort. She went out along the Galilee hills and came to a crowd gathered around a man. And he stood on the outskirts, and she stood on the outskirts, intending to just listen to what he had to say. But this man looked over the crowd at her and said, "What do you want?" And she said, "Could you send someone to come with me and help me stand up after the tests? Because I can't manage alone." And Jesus said, "How would it be if I came with you?" How would it be if we could call a friend and say, "Hey, my knees are shaking today. I'm getting ready to go through a challenge. I just need Jesus with skin. I need Jesus to walk with me. Can you be that partner with me?" And when we find ourselves alone, Jesus always says, "How can I be there for you?" Well, you see, Pastor Hoker states it, I think, this way too. We grow in faith as we increasingly see our crisis and our cries from the perspective of Jesus. When the powers of death no longer enslave us, but we are moved to wonder at how life prevails and how it is through the crisis that we are to be led to life. And that's how our text is today. You know, the disciples were scared, we get scared, and all we have to do is ask for help. Close our eyes and know the Lord. And the best way we can do that, I think, is reading the Bible. And it's also about listening to the stories that touch our soul, listening to the conversations from each other, how they interact in our lives, and where our faith is. That's where some monks found themselves. Their leader was now 53 years old, but he appeared almost much older because of his cancer and what it had done to him. The dozens of men who had gathered to hear him speak were well aware of his illness and how it had impacted them this last year. The man in the wheelchair was Bonaventure Zur, abbot of a Benedictine community in Oregon. The men around him were monks of that community. 8 years earlier, they had elected him as abbot, expecting that he would occupy the position for a good 20 years. They knew him well, this very large man with an imposing intellect who yet had this easygoing, compassionate, confident personality. They knew him well, and in a short time, he would be dead. The assembled monks looked at Bonaventure with affection and respect. They also looked to him as with a reverence, for according to the rule of Benedict, the abbot holds the place of Christ in the monastery. So here was their Christ, Christ in a wheelchair, days away from death. His last words to the assembled monks were almost exactly what he said to them moments after he had been elected abbot 8 years earlier. in biblical times, he told them from his wheelchair, when God's people were in trouble, he would send them an angel to help. Well, today, he has not sent an angel this time, but I have an angelic message for you. This bear of a man, sick yet strong, slammed his fist on the table in front of him and commanded with a loud voice, "Stop being afraid." Fear can cripple us and keep us down, but what if, rather than letting fear be our first response, we remember we can be anchored in Jesus? When we see the first storm cloud, think there is no way out or no way to see what's ahead, knowing that with God there will always be a way through whatever challenge we face in this life. I say, anchors away, my brothers and sisters, for fear does not have to take control of us. We have faith which calls us to remember that God will not abandon us, not in any storm of our life, not even when the winds are gale force. No, God will come, still the wind and waves, calming the fear-ridden heart, telling us again and again, we are God's beloved children and being called to have a little bit more faith, a greater faith. When we comfort each other with the news of God's steadfast love, we are playing one of the greatest roles described and assigned throughout Scripture. For at critical moments across the biblical drama, apostles, angels, and prophets will be sent to the people of God to say these powerful, simple words. Do not be afraid. Each time we say and hear these words, we join all those saints before who were caught up in the Spirit of God, find the courage not just to survive, but to flourish, not just to live, but to live with abundance, and not just get by, knowing the favor we enjoy through Christ. May we dare great things, expect great things, and ask for great things, and share great things. May we know we are the beloved child of God. We just need to anchor ourselves daily in God's love, and most of all, to not be afraid. Amen.